Today is March 31st, 2025, and this is William Michael, the headmaster of the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. On social media, I've noticed a message that's passed around quite a bit among homeschooling families and homeschooling advocates. It says the average cost of educating a student in modern public schools is something like $17,000 per year per student, whereas the cost of educating a child at home through homeschooling is only $1,000 a year. And the argument is that many of the public school students are illiterate, whereas all of the homeschooling students are literate. And so not only is the education better at home, but it costs a fraction of what it costs for public education. $17,000 per year per student in the public school, just $1,000 per year at home. Nothing about this message is true, however. Nothing about this message is true. First of all, when we talk about public school students, we have to be just and acknowledge that we're talking about a broad range of students, ranging from honors students who may be headed to the most selective universities, all the way down to the lowest level students, even special needs students, all of whom receive care at the local public school. Whoever gets dropped off outside the public school door is accepted into the school. And so criticizing public schools really doesn't make any sense. What makes even less sense is comparing Catholic schools or homeschooling to public schools. It's really not a fair comparison because homeschools and Catholic schools are not doing what public schools are doing. Now, I don't believe that public schooling should be used by Catholic families, but at the same time, I do believe it serves an important public function serving the common good in our society. I was a public school student myself. I was one of the honors students. I know the good that a public school can offer, especially when a gifted individual comes from a family that isn't concerned about education. It provides many opportunities that would otherwise not be available. But ultimately, the output or the result of public school depends on what families put into it. When parents are engaged in their children's studies and supportive of the teachers and helpful in the school, their children tend to do very well. And when parents are not involved and just sort of abandon their children to the public school, those children do very poorly. The public school is stuck with the results of all of those different circumstances, and then we're foolishly comparing what we do in private education to what the public schools are doing. That's really not a fair comparison, and it's not a comparison that any Catholic families or schools should be making. The second problem with that message being passed around on social media is this idea that public schooling is expensive and homeschooling is cheap. The idea that a public school spends $17,000 per child and it only costs $1,000 to homeschool is just shallow-minded and ridiculous. I would argue it probably costs much more to homeschool children than it does for public schools to educate them. The reason is we're not comparing apples with apples when we talk about these two numbers. The price, $17,000 per year, is a comprehensive cost of education. It includes the cost of facilities, teacher and administrator salaries, study materials, everything that's involved in running the public school, a massive institution with massive overhead, divided by the number of students. This $1,000 a year number for homeschooling likely comes from the cost of study materials. So we're comparing apples with oranges when we talk about these numbers. What would happen, for example, if we compared the cost of a mother staying home from a career, from a full-time work opportunity in order to homeschool her children? My wife, for example, was an elementary school teacher, and when our first child was born, my wife expressed the desire to stay at home and be a housewife and homeschool the children. We lost her full-time teaching salary for the sake of motherhood and homeschooling. So to sit there and say that homeschooling only costs $1,000 a year is just ridiculous. It costs us tens of thousands of dollars per year to homeschool our children. And there are many other costs involved. The use of our home, for example, is not figured into the cost. All of these different costs, the value of time, and so on. None of these things are being calculated, and it's really a disrespectful number that misrepresents the virtue of homeschooling to say it only costs $1,000 to homeschool. That's not true at all. But we get into this false thinking in modern homeschool circles where people who are carelessly, I would say irresponsibly, promoting homeschooling want to puff it up in order to urge people to quote unquote pull their kids out of school. And usually this is done from a marketing perspective. It's usually homeschool publishers encouraging people to pull their kids out of school and purchase their homeschool materials or to sign up for their homeschool program. And so they love making all of these irrational comparisons to try and make it seem like homeschooling is an easy and more affordable option for families than sending their children to school. And parents need to be very careful because when you choose to homeschool your children, you take upon yourself full responsibility for their education. We live in a society, in a generation where education is legally required. It's compulsory. Children must receive an education that's equivalent to the education that's provided at the local public school. Parents, when they choose to homeschool, need to register as homeschooling parents, and they take upon themselves all of the responsibility of their children's education. That's a very serious responsibility to take upon oneself. And if parents are going to take that responsibility, they better do so thoughtfully and carefully because it's a very serious commitment. And I would warn parents against listening to homeschool salespeople, conference speakers, curriculum sellers, book sellers, and so on, who publish all of this misrepresenting homeschool propaganda almost, to think very carefully about the truth of these things and make sure that before you make a rash decision or before you make a reckless decision, you compare apples with apples and that you don't get caught up in this deceitful, really misleading and irrational homeschool advertising because it's not true. What I'd like to talk about in this talk today is understanding what's needed, realistically speaking, what's needed to succeed in homeschooling. What's needed to succeed in homeschooling? I founded the Classical Liberal Arts Academy in 2008 because our firstborn child was 8 years old. My wife expressed a desire to homeschool the children, and I supported her in that desire. But I was a full-time classics teacher working in an elite private school. I knew what excellent education looked like. I knew what great teachers looked like. I knew that I worked with some very talented, hardworking Christian teachers in all different subject areas. I knew how much the private school that I worked at provided for students, and my children could have attended that private school because I was a teacher there. So when my wife expressed a desire to homeschool, I wanted to support her because she herself studied classics and was an elementary school teacher, so I knew she wasn't crazy. But I also wanted her to realize how false homeschool messaging was, and I wanted her to have a realistic expectation of what successful homeschooling would actually require. She started collecting all of the different homeschool curriculum catalogs and information about all the different programs. And as I would come home at night from school, she would share with me different things and show me different things. She had a few programs that were of interest to her, and she wanted to know my thoughts. And as I looked at them, I told her, there's a fundamental problem that runs through all of these homeschool programs. None of them are designed for you. None of them are designed for a homeschooling mother. All of these programs that you're showing me, they're all grade-level modern school programs that are simply made available to homeschool families. They offer K-12 grade-level studies in all of the different subjects available in modern schools. And so if you've got 3 children, you're supposed to buy 3 different grade level sets of study materials. And then you're supposed to conduct and organize and manage the study of these 3 different children in 3 different grade levels. And I just don't think that that is an intelligent approach to homeschooling. You're basically acting as if you're a modern K-12 school, but you're not. You're at home with your own children. The circumstances are completely different. The opportunities are completely different. The benefits are completely different. And the methods also need to be completely different, because what you're going to be doing at home is nothing like what I'm doing and what my fellow teachers are doing at school. What you're doing at home is nothing like what I and my colleagues are doing at school. And so I don't think that any of these programs will work. Now, I have to admit that at the same time, as a private school teacher who was also moving into administrative work, I saw and dealt with many homeschool families, and I was not impressed with homeschooling, especially in light of what our students were doing in the private school. I believed that homeschooling had potential to do much more. In fact, I was critical of modern day schooling because teachers and students could work together for daytime hours, but students spend much more time away from their teachers than they do with their teachers. And I always spoke to my wife about the fact that I wish that I could develop a boarding school where the students enjoyed access to their teachers and could have their environment and culture controlled more and made more conducive for study. So I was critical of day schooling, dropping kids off in the morning and picking them up in the afternoon, because the kids just spent so much time away from school. And so when I looked at homeschooling, I acknowledged that homeschooling had potential because it was like a boarding school. The teachers and the students are always together. The culture is always under the control of the teachers. And you could really cultivate virtue and pursue high-level intellectual goals, things that you could never pursue in a day school. And so I was positive in my view of the potential of homeschooling, but I never saw a family who even approached that potential. What I saw were usually homeschool families who, for some strange reason, chose to keep their kids out of schools. And really all that they did then was give their kids a modern grade level education at home. Or they got wrapped up in the fake classical education nonsense with, the Dorothy Sayers movement and all that stuff. And I never respected homeschooling because I saw it as something pursued by people who usually have no experience teaching, don't have the curriculum questions and philosophical issues sorted out, couldn't answer questions reasonably about goals for education at home, and they ended up making a big fuss, homeschooling their kids for a little while, then eventually quitting and quietly sending all of their kids back to school. And that was sort of the cycle in my experience of dealing with homeschool families. Usually, we were receiving homeschool students into the private school who were behind and all out of sorts, and they were hoping to get them back on track with grade level studies. But I knew that homeschooling had potential. However, all of the programs that my wife was looking at were grade level programs being sold to homeschool parents. And I told my wife, none of these are going to work. None of these are going to work, nor do I want you to live this life of the homeschool mother. I want you to be my Catholic wife. I want you to be my children's Catholic mother. I don't want you to be this crazy, frenetic homeschool lady talking about curriculum and going through catalogs and going to conferences and staying up late, searching all through websites to quote unquote design your own curriculum. I don't want that in my wife. I don't want this homeschool lady in my home. I want you to be a Catholic wife and a Catholic mother. I want you to pursue your own Catholic devotional life and your own vocation. I don't want you imitating these other women who turn their whole families and lives upside down in the name of homeschooling and end up not accomplishing very much anyway. And so what I told my wife at that time was that I would begin to draft and lay out a plan for what she should do with the children in order to homeschool them effectively and enjoyably, to actually enjoy all of the benefits that are available through homeschooling, which I didn't believe any homeschool program provided for. And so I began to prepare materials for her to use with the children. And I emphasized to her and took time to teach her and help her to understand what was different about homeschooling and how it needed to be managed to be effective. I explained that the fundamental difference is that a school sorts children by age, and then a teacher focuses on a specific group of homogeneous students. A teacher, let's say a second grade teacher, teaches 25 8-year-olds. The students are all the same. She's responsible for a large number of children, but they're all the same. And so her lesson plans, her study materials, her lesson content, her grading, it all is the same. It's just multiplied by a number of students. And then when you get up into higher levels of schooling, different teachers take on individual subjects. So you've got a math teacher and an English teacher and a science teacher, but each of those teachers focuses only on his subject. And then it divides even further into different levels. So a science teacher teaching honors students focuses on those students in that one subject. And a level 2 science teacher is dealing with a different group of students who are similar in the same subject. So school teachers teach a single grade level and even a single subject and even a single level of study based on the student. So the work of a school teacher is to specialize on a particular subject and group of students and then focus on providing for that group. That's what K-12 schooling is about. That's how it's organized. That's how the school is designed and structured. That's why the costs are what they are, because lots of teachers are needed to serve large numbers of students. When we come to homeschooling, we find a completely different arrangement, completely different circumstances with different needs that require different methods, different organization, and so on, even different study materials. We have one homeschool mother, usually, working with a number of children who are of different ages. So the challenge here in homeschooling is completely different from that in grade level schooling. The homeschool mother is not working with a group of students who are all in the same subject at the same age, working at the same level. The homeschooling mother is dealing with a number of children who are different in age, who require different levels of study, have different curriculum requirements. And so we can see that this is a very different and difficult situation to manage. Buying grade level homeschool curricula doesn't address the actual circumstances of homeschooling. It really doesn't make any sense. Homeschooling parents are buying things that make sense to them because they were educated in modern schools and think of schooling in terms of grade levels. But what they're doing in homeschooling is nothing like grade level education. And so they buy all of this stuff, and it really doesn't work in a homeschool setting. They know that it doesn't work. They can feel that it doesn't work. And what happens over time is the homeschool parents buy boxes and boxes, sometimes thousands of dollars of homeschool supplies. And they quickly learn that there's no way to actually serve all of those activities and requirements for that program, which is very poorly conceived. And so they just start leaving things out. They start watering it down and simplifying it until they finally get to a point where they can manage this grade level program with their children. And it usually boils down to the level of bare minimum requirements where kids are largely checking off workbook activities. We'll hear people say things like, oh, we get all our homeschooling work done in just 2 hours. And there's nothing more cringeworthy and embarrassing than to hear something like that, because the parents are confessing that they've reduced their children's education to the bare minimum requirements and are comparing themselves to modern schools and doing the minimum, which is obviously no one's intention in homeschooling. So there's the homeschool conference appearance of all of this enthusiasm and all of this lofty talk about potential and achievement and all of these materials and programs and activities and so on, all of these bubbly, excited parents and publishers talking about their programs. But then there's the reality of what's actually going on in homeschool families, what the children are actually receiving and experiencing at home. And those are two very different realities. So I told my wife, you've got to understand this difference, and you've got to learn how to manage the education of the children in a very different environment. Now, fortunately, I told her, what you can think of is the old one-room schoolhouse, because that's what the one-room schoolhouse did. The one-room schoolhouse was set up in a community, a small community, usually an agricultural community, where families were somewhat spread out because they were farming. they weren't all living crammed together in a suburb or an urban, apartment complex or something like that. They were spread out. There weren't many people in the area. So there was a small number of children, and they wanted those children to be educated, at least through primary school, usually through sixth or eighth grade in modern terms. And so they would gather the children together at the local schoolhouse, and they'd have this mixture of whoever the kids were in the community. And then they would find usually a young lady who was available, who would be their teacher, and she would manage the elementary education of all of the children in the community. And so she would be responsible for a room that served a dozen students, 20 students of different ages and different abilities. And the kids just came in and out of the schoolhouse. Everything about the schoolhouse was different. The books they used were different from modern school books. The way they were arranged was different. The methods of teaching and studying were different. The methods of assessment were different. Everything about that one-room schoolhouse was different from the larger modern school. And homeschooling is really like a small one-room schoolhouse. The homeschooling mother is really an old schoolhouse teacher. It's just that she only teaches her own children. So the methods are different, the materials are different, the whole approach is different, how the children pursue their studies is different. Everything about homeschooling is different from the modern school, and a K-12 curriculum that provides grade-level materials and lesson plans for homeschooling parents makes no sense. That's what I told my wife. So you can show me all the different programs. You can show me Seton Homeschool and Angelicum Academy and Mother of Divine Grace and all these different programs. But when I look at them as a professional teacher and curriculum developer, I look at them and I say, they may all have superficial differences. They may use different books. They may have some different gimmicks that they promote as, specific to their program, but really they're all doing the same exact thing, and it's all inappropriate for homeschooling. They're simply taking a modern school approach to education and selling it to homeschooling parents who, for the most part, don't know any better than to think outside of the modern grade level box. And so I told my wife, as I said, I don't think you should choose any of these curricula. I think that we have to accept the challenge of developing something that's customized for our goals and our circumstances if we're going to homeschool. Otherwise, we're not going to enjoy the benefits that are available through homeschooling. And I think you're going to be miserable trying to conduct this foolish undertaking. And so I began to lay things out for my wife. That was back in 2007, 2008. And as I started to do that, in God's providence, I was contacted by some other Catholic families in the area who were trying to organize an independent Catholic school. And they had learned about me through the private schools, even though I wasn't in a Catholic school. And so I attended a meeting and spoke to them about these same sorts of issues. And it was a very small group of people with a very specific set of goals for education, and yet they were all doing the same thing. They were all wrapped up in the modern grade level method, trying to figure out how to start a school and have all these grade levels and all these teachers and all these books and supplies, where they would find a facility that could be used. And I just told them, everything you're doing makes no sense in light of your circumstances. You basically have a one-room schoolhouse community, and you're trying to start a school, and you're going to implement the modern public school model for what is really a schoolhouse community. That's your problem. And none of you are familiar with the materials or the methods or the arrangement of that one-room schoolhouse because you've all been brainwashed to think that that was just some kind of silly Amish thing that people did back then. And now we're all so smart and we have grade level schools. But the difference is we're dealing with two different sets of circumstances. If you're dealing with a small, diverse community of students, you should organize as a one-room schoolhouse. And the only time that you should have a grade level school program is if you've got a large number of students that justify such an arrangement. So you'd need 10 to 12 to 20 students in every grade to justify using a grade level method, because they would have to come up with tuition that was sufficient to provide for facilities, teacher salaries, and so on. It gets very expensive. And if you don't have those numbers, you just can't fund a decent school. And what we see in most small Christian or Catholic private schools is what I call ghetto schooling, that they really can't afford to do what they're doing. And if you just look at pictures of the school, pictures of the students, pictures of the faculty, pictures of the classroom, it just looks poor. Everyone looks poor. They don't have enough money to manage the school model that they've chosen. And that's just a prudential error that they've made in choosing the wrong model for their school. And this is what most homeschool families do. They do the same thing. They choose a model that they're not going to be able to sustain, and they just endlessly throw money at it and think that they're just not scheduling well enough. They're not working hard enough. Maybe dad needs to spend less time at work to help with the homeschooling. The whole house is turned upside down for homeschooling, and no one stops and asks, is the method we're using just stupid and the cause of all of our troubles? And the answer is yes. The answer is that the method, the arrangement, the system you're using is imprudent. It doesn't apply or serve the circumstances. And so I explained this to my wife, and then I explained this also to this group of Catholic families, and that's what led to the development of the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. I told my wife that I would develop a program that our children could use, that she could use with our children. And I told these local Catholic families that I would do the same. I told them that I would actually come to their homes and I could meet with their children. We could gather the children together and I would teach them together. I would actually show them what to do. I would prepare and provide them with the materials and help them to see how differently things need to be done in a small school community or a homeschool environment. Well, as that started, those families began to tell other families, and they began to tell other families, and within a few months, I had over 1,000 students enrolled with me for these studies, and I began to post the materials and articles online to explain how to think about homeschooling, how to think about small schooling, how to organize, how to teach, how to assess, how to manage the studies, how to schedule, and so on, because it's all very different. And it began to spread very quickly. And as I said, by the next spring, there were 1,000 students enrolled. And that's really where the Classical Liberal Arts Academy was established. So my message to homeschooling parents is, if you're using a modern homeschool program, and it doesn't matter if it calls itself classical, that's just a bunch of marketing nonsense. The only thing that's classical, just to be very clear here, if your children are not studying the 7 classical liberal arts from the authoritative sources of those arts, for example, if your children are not studying Latin and Greek grammar, if your children are not studying logic taught from the works of Aristotle and rhetoric taught from Aristotle and Cicero, and the classical mathematics, the quadrivium, arithmetic taught by an ancient philosopher like Nicomachus, geometry from Euclid, music from Boethius, and astronomy from Ptolemy, if they're not studying the classical liberal arts, the 7 liberal arts, they are not receiving a classical education. It doesn't matter what pictures are used in the catalogs. It doesn't matter how fancy the people are selling the program. Doesn't matter, what they say or how they explain away what they're doing. If your children are not studying the 7 liberal arts, grammar, reasoning, rhetoric, arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy, and you can't allow those words to be mixed up with modern subjects that use the same words. Just because you have Saxon math does not mean that your child is studying classical arithmetic. It's something completely different than modern math. So don't be deceived by the words. If you've got a modern geometry textbook, like homeschool families talk about Jacob's geometry, that is not classical geometry. Classical geometry means the study of Euclid's elements. If your children are not studying the 7 liberal arts from the authoritative sources, they are not receiving a classical education. It doesn't matter what anyone says. It doesn't matter how snazzy the marketing is or what gimmicks they use or how much you like the people who represent the program. They're just making stuff up. If they're calling a modern grade level program classical education and just selling you the same subjects in grade level format for your children, you're just getting duped by a marketing scam. Classical education means the study of the 7 liberal arts. Children should be led to the study of philosophy during their high school years. They should be getting into Aristotelian philosophy, studying the writings of Aristotle. They should be studying St. Thomas Aquinas and the Summa Theologica in high school, studying real scholastic theology. If they're not getting into those studies, no matter what anyone tells you, your children are not receiving a classical education. It has nothing to do with the so-called great books, which is just literature. Most of the books in the so-called great books lists are modern books. They obviously have nothing to do with classical education. So you've got to be realistic. You've got to be honest. It doesn't matter how much money you've spent. It doesn't matter what you like necessarily. If you're going to talk about classical Catholic education, if you're going to talk about the education of wise men and saints throughout history, you've got to be honest. You've got to know and tell and practice the truth. In the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, this is what we do. So not only do we restore the curriculum, that is the actual curriculum, the course of study that was enjoyed and taught by wise men and saints all through history, but we present it in a way that actually works for homeschool families. It actually works for a small private school that wants to develop and operate with a one-room schoolhouse or a diverse student model. Our program is designed to work like that. Now, fortunately, we're able to do this for a large number of students because of the available technology. The technology we have allows us to do things that would be impossible in the past. It would be impossible for a single headmaster to oversee and manage the studies of thousands of children. Everything would have to be local. The groups would have to be very small. And because the groups were small, there normally wasn't much money. And so the schools were usually low quality because they couldn't hire some great master school teacher. They usually hired, a local, decently educated young lady who was single and available to serve as the teacher. But today, what's allowed by technology is for a small number of administrators using database tools to allow individual students to study for mastery and to make individual progress through the true classical liberal arts curriculum at their own pace. This is what technology allows that is so radically different than what other programs are providing. We can take a large number of students all around the world. And we can say, every one of you, because of this technology that we've arranged for you, every one of you can study the same curriculum, can work for mastery. So we're not going to give grades. We're not going to give you an A and you a C and you a D and put you in different levels. No, you can all work for mastery. You can all pursue the same knowledge, the same quality learning, and you can do it at your own pace. And we can manage all of your studies, all of your progress, even though you're all working individually through our database, which is going to manage and track every single thing you do every day. We can provide you with all the study materials. We can provide online copies of the study materials, so you don't even have to buy any books. We can provide quizzes on every single lesson you study, and you can retake those quizzes as many times as you need to until you finally master that lesson. We can provide you with written assignments that you can complete whenever you're ready, and you can submit whenever you're ready. And we'll review those assignments, we'll provide you with feedback, and you can redo those assignments and resubmit them until you earn perfect scores. And you can work for mastery in every subject, in every lesson, at your own pace. That's how homeschooling should work. Every homeschool student should be allowed to work for mastery at his own pace. And that's what we provide in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. So it's not just that we have a different curriculum. It's not just that we study different books. The difference between the Classical Liberal Arts Academy and every other homeschool program is much greater than just the curriculum. Our program is designed to lead every single student to mastery in real classical Catholic education. That's what's different about our program. Now, some may say, yeah, but the modern programs, they give degrees and diplomas and transcripts, and they're accredited and all this stuff. And what about college and curriculum? It's all baloney. Accreditation has nothing to do with the grade school model. How do I know that? The Classical Liberal Arts Academy is accredited. We have the same accreditation that the public schools have. The accreditation agents, the people who actually evaluate the schools, they understand these things. Parents often don't understand these things. The people working for the homeschool publishers and in these private schools, they usually don't know what they're talking about when it comes to accreditation and education law. The Classical Liberal Arts Academy, as different as it is fully accredited by Cognia, which is the highest level of accreditation that's available. In fact, you'll find some homeschool programs actually using fake accreditation. Accreditation organizations that they created themselves, and they're basically accrediting themselves and their friends in the homeschool community. So if we're going to talk about accreditation, let's make sure we're talking about real, reputable, international accreditation agencies. Otherwise, there's no point talking about accreditation. But that's meaningless because the Classical Liberal Arts Academy is fully accredited. So all the excuses that are given for modern education, they're all false. We can provide our children with a true classical Catholic education, studying the same things that were studied by wise men and saints all through history. We can do it in the comfort of our own home. We can do it in a way that actually works for homeschooling families. We can do it with full accreditation, responsibly, as I like to say. We can provide our children with a classical Catholic education without turning into, wacky unschooling people. We can provide our children with accredited diplomas for them to move on after their childhood is over and they get to choose what they're going to pursue as adults. We can provide for their pursuits of secular or religious vocations. We can provide for them to enter into the military or into modern selective colleges and universities. We don't have to choose one or the other. That's a myth. We can provide everything. But the greatest benefit to parents is that our program is designed for your circumstances. Our program is designed for your circumstances. Not only do we give you access to accounts for every one of your children to study at their own pace, we grade all of their assignments, we keep all of the records for you, we record every single activity that they do, we even track all of the time they spend, we track their attendance for you. As long as they're active and working, our system records all of the time they spend online, which shows them working on studies and basically keeps an attendance record for you, which you can access through our reports. We track all the time they spend in every course. We track all of their grades. We provide access to progress reports for every term, for every year. We provide transcripts that accumulate all of their studies across the years. We even provide for diplomas if all the diploma requirements are satisfied. We provide everything that you need. And remember, my goal in doing this for my own wife and my own children was that I wanted my wife not to be the crazy homeschool lady that I saw in homeschool circles, this exhausted, frazzled woman trying to do something that made no sense. I wanted my wife to be a healthy and happy Catholic wife and mother first. And I wanted, if she was going to homeschool our children, I wanted her to do it in a way that was reasonable and allowed her to continue to be a Catholic wife and mother. You can call me selfish, but I wanted my wife to be my wife. I loved that lady and didn't plan to sacrifice her to homeschooling nonsense. I had a plan for my own marriage that I wanted to fulfill. I like to go out to dinner with my wife and spend time with my wife. I come home from work, I want to be with my wife in the evening. I don't want to sit there while she wrestles with endless homeschool tasks and is stressed about scheduling and books and all this. I didn't want my wife to deal with that, and I knew she shouldn't have to. And for my children, I wanted my children to enjoy having a Catholic mother and not living full time with a miserable school teacher, always stressed about school and talking about school. I wanted my children to have a mother. And so to provide myself with a Catholic wife and my children with a Catholic mother, I needed to make sure that our homeschooling could be done in a way that didn't require mom to become the crazy homeschool lady. And that's what the Classical Liberal Arts Academy does. So for example, just to wrap this up with some practical details, we provide the students with all of their courses, all of their lesson materials already broken down into individual tasks. So there's no need to plan the curriculum or plan out lessons or organize materials or organize activities, all this nonsense. Everything's already prepared. It's very simple and straightforward. All that a homeschooling mother needs to do once her children are enrolled in our program is to help them during their scheduled study times complete their tasks. That's all that a mother needs to do. She simply needs to help her children complete their tasks. She doesn't need to plan. She doesn't need to keep records. She doesn't need to organize activities. She doesn't need to pretend she's a school teacher. She doesn't need to put together her own reports or diplomas or progress reports. She doesn't need to do any of that because our system does it all for her. All that a homeschooling mother needs to do in our program, if she uses it as she should, is help her children enjoy their studies and complete their tasks. And so what I like to say about the Classical Liberal Arts Academy is when it's rightly used, not if parents do whatever they want with it, I'm not responsible for that, but when parents use it as it's intended to be used, it allows homeschooling to be effective and enjoyable. That's my goal for homeschooling. It allows us to enjoy all the benefits of homeschooling, which one example One example of a benefit of homeschooling is flexibility. Flexibility means that for a homeschooling family, schools open all year. Schools open 12 months a year. Schools open morning, afternoon, evening, and night. There's time for study all day, every day, year round, and families can choose when to take a day off, when to take a break, when to take a vacation, when family's visiting and they're going to step away from studies for a couple of days. One of the greatest benefits of homeschooling is that it's flexible and it allows us to actually spend more time on education, not less, but it's flexible. So for example, it's just about April 1st here, and in a month, my family has a bunch of traveling to do. We've got to drive to Missouri for one military graduation. We've got to go out to Colorado for another military graduation. May is going to be a busy month. We'll likely just take weeks off from homeschooling for our family traveling and enjoy it. And we'll study through June, study through July, study through August. We usually take a vacation and go to the beach for a week or so in July, and then study the rest of July. We usually take another break sometime in August. Our family keeps our own schedule. It's very flexible, and we're free to study year-round. So one of the greatest benefits is that it allows us to put in 250 days a year of school rather than 180, but at the same time, it's completely flexible. We can take a day off anytime we want. We can welcome family that's visiting. We can travel if we need to, take a break and go on a vacation for a couple days if we need to. It's flexible, and yet when we get back to work, the kids just pick up where they left off and get right back to their tasks. So it's flexible. Another benefit that I just mentioned is that it's available year-round. So we have access to these studies and to academic progress 365 days a year from morning until bedtime. And the kids can work as much as they want, as much as they will, and get far more done than any modern school student can get done because the whole curriculum with support is available to them all day, every day to work as much as they want to. So it also allows for higher standards and the pursuit of a more rigorous study program than can even be possible in a modern school. And then when it comes to cost, if parents just want to manage it themselves, it costs only $25 per month per student. But if parents want everything, they want, there's a whole list of resources, but they want all the lessons, all of the content, quizzes, assignments, grading, records, reports, attendance reports, transcripts, diplomas, live classes, all of the benefits that are available to them in the academy. That's available with the premium enrollment, which is only $100 a month. You can have it for a whole year for just $1,000 per year for a student, which, again, we need to make sure we're comparing apples with apples. When you talk about another homeschool program charging so much money just for the books, and then you realize that doesn't teach the books, it doesn't include assessment, doesn't include records or reporting or consultation or support. You've got to make sure you're comparing apples with apples. Our premium program includes everything, all the way down to the accredited diploma and transcripts. Everything is included. Live support throughout the day. Everything is included in our premium enrollment program, and it costs only $100 a month or $1,000 per year. And if you have a bunch of kids that you'd like to enroll in the premium, there's a cap at $2,500 for the whole year for the whole family to have premium access. So the most you can possibly pay in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy for everything would be with our premium family enrollment, and that would cost $2,500 per year or $250 if you pay monthly. So it's very affordable for families, but it's also excellent. It makes sense for homeschooling families. It's designed for homeschooling families. And I think if you give it a chance and follow the instructions and learn to think differently and approach homeschooling as it should be approached, it might take a little while for you to get used to it because it's very different. But once you start to realize all the benefits, that's when you'll be able to homeschool effectively and, most importantly, enjoyably. That's my goal, to make homeschooling effective and enjoyable. So I hope that's helpful. I hope it's encouraging to think about the prospect of having homeschooling actually be effective and enjoyable. I'm sure that you've got a million questions, and I'd like to make a few recommendations about what to do next. First of all, realize that we're available for any questions you have. You can just send them to us by email. Our email address is simply mail, M-A-I-L, @classicalliberalarts.com. So any questions you have, feel free to send them. We'll answer everyone in detail. Secondly, back in 2009, 2010, I taught a course for Catholic parents when I was developing this and helping people to learn about it. I taught a course and published a number of lessons that I have compiled into a book. The book is called Understanding Classical Catholic Education. It talks about the history of classical liberal arts education, all the principles of classical liberal arts education, what happened to classical education in history, and what we need to do to restore and enjoy classical Catholic education today. That book is available for free on the Academy website. So if you go to classicalliberalarts.com, you'll see right on the front page of the website a big banner with a link to that free book. I recommend that you get a copy of that book, download a free copy, and take your time reading through it. It's written very simply. As I said, it was written for homeschooling parents. It's not a scholarly or nerdy book. It's intended to be practical and helpful. That book's been very popular, and I think you'll enjoy reading through that book and learning the history and principles of real classical Catholic education. So that's another resource that I'd recommend to get started. Thirdly, we have a sample student plan in the Academy, which you can sign up for, and then you can gain access to our study center where you can see all of our online courses, all of the different tools and resources, the quizzes, the assignments, the grade book, everything that's available. You can just dig in, check it all out, click around and see things, so you don't have to try to guess what all of this looks like. So you can make use of that sample student plan on the Academy website. Next, we have a weekly parent meeting. We meet on Wednesday nights on Zoom. It's a small group that gets together. It's open to anyone who's interested. But we have a Zoom meeting on Wednesday evenings at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, and it's just open Q&A. So my wife and I host it. We start at 9 o'clock. Anyone who's interested is welcome to join. You can bring any questions you have, ask any questions you have. You can be on the video with us, with your video camera on, talking with us, or you can choose to just leave your camera off and listen. And you can post questions in the text chat that runs alongside the meeting. So you're invited to join us. The meetings are free to attend, but you need to register. So if you need registration information where you can do that, again, just write to us at mail@classicalliberalarts.com. and we'll give you a link to the registration. We try to control access to that link just so crazies from the internet don't get on there and we end up having some weirdos show up to the meeting. We like to at least know who's contacting us, who's registering, and so on, but you're invited to join us. And again, it's free, but you do need to register. So weekly parent meetings. And then lastly, I just recommend that you visit the website at classicalliberalarts.com and just dig around. There's tons of resources, tons of videos, there's articles, very helpful explanations of all of the curriculum, how enrollment works. You can see the different enrollment options that are all explained and compared for you. There's also a chatbot on the Academy website that is surprisingly helpful. You can use the chatbot to ask questions, and that'll usually direct you to helpful information. But there's tons of help available. It's designed for homeschooling families, and I invite you to make use of it and enjoy it because, as I said, it will allow you to provide your children with a real classical Catholic education and do so enjoyably. You don't have to become a crazy, frazzled homeschool lady. You can be a Catholic wife, you can be a Catholic mother, and at the same time, give your children a great classical Catholic education at home. So if you have any questions, get in touch, but I hope that's helpful and encouraging. Come and check things out. Our website, again, is classicalliberalarts.com, and my name is William Michael. I'm the founder and headmaster of the program. You can see information about my wife and I on the website. Check it out, get in touch, and get started, God willing, and enjoy a great education for both yourself and your children. God bless.